Welcome to the latest episode of the Informing Choices mini-pod, where today we're discussing a topic that's both crucial and transformative: inclusive workplaces nurturing culturally dynamic, multi-generational workplaces. We'll start by defining inclusive workplaces and why fostering diversity in gender, culture, and age matters. Next, we'll highlight the three key drivers fueling this trend. Is it purely social expectations, or are technological, economic, and generational shifts also playing a role? Looking forward to 2030, we'll visualize the potential futures of workplace inclusivity. In the best case scenario, could we see organizations fully embracing diversity and reshaping the benefits of collaboration and innovation? Or in the worst case, will we see workplaces struggle with exclusion, limiting productivity and creativity? Then finally, we'll explore practical actions that organizations can start implementing right now to build a more inclusive future. Once again, I'm delighted to welcome co-founder of Working the Future, Kat Barnard, to another episode in our collaborative series of podcasts. Kat, welcome back.
Thanks, Steve. Every episode, I think both our collective brains are exploding, aren't they?
They really are. They really are. It's a good job I've got a skull to keep it in, otherwise it'd be a mess in the room at the moment. So inclusion is at the heart of the socially focused UN Sustainable Development Goals, which I think were a really useful template to help us think about in any enterprise how we should be considering the future. But within that context, what do we mean by inclusive workplaces here?
Gosh, I mean, again, there are so many different strands to this, but at heart, I think what we're talking about is an inclusive workplace is one that does not discriminate on any grounds and that proactively tries to recruit internal stakeholders across diverse categories that can include but are not limited to age, gender, sexuality, cultural background, ability, disability, and also to some degree, academic qualifications. That's becoming a thing, very much in the United States, here to a lesser extent, but still a considered extent, which is that it's increasingly difficult to get into organizations if you don't have a bachelor's degree. In fact, in the United States, sorry, I'm just going to add on,
Yeah,
as I
sure.
understand it from my American friends, you literally cannot access good work in this day and age almost without a master's in the United States.
What the question that immediately popped into my mind is, what role are recruiters playing in that? Is there a sense that recruiters feel they have to do that in order to show their clients how good they are? Why are we at that point?
See, I have to say, I believe that recruitment as a function has been largely defunded. It's been marginalized by overambitious procurement departments who think that recruitment is nothing more than a paper shuffling exercise. And I think what we've ended up with is an industry that that is not accustomed to respectful challenge and educating clients on the market realities.
Mm.
So if a client says, I want a five-legged giraffe that looks like a reindeer, few and far between are the recruiters that will push back and say, well, that doesn't exist, but here's what you can have instead.
And is part of that down to something I think you've mentioned before about the priority of establishing a lowest cost per hire? Is that the kind of what you were getting at when you were talking
Yeah,
about kind of
yeah. I mean,
procurement?
that was definitely so kind of introducing centralized recruitment teams was a trend that followed the dot-com crash of the early 2000s. And the quest for cost control and efficiency kind of permeated the recruitment talent acquisition industry. But again, unforeseen, unanticipated consequences. Here we are 20 years later, and we've ended up in a situation where, although we talk about diversity and inclusion at work, we just play lip service to that, because actually what we want is more of the same. And, the quest for diversity and inclusion is at polar opposites with recruiting for cultural fit. For those who are listening and not viewing, they've just seen my inverted comma kind of quote marks, cultural fit. Hiring for cultural fit just implies that you just want more of the same. It is the absolute antithesis of diversity and inclusion.
And do you think it takes courage in leaders to recruit people that might be challenging for them and their organizations? And is that the piece that's missing out, or one of the pieces that's missing out to help ensure greater diversity in workforces?
Yeah, I think there's a proneness in all of us to seek comfort. So therefore, somebody that looks like me, talks like me, walks like me is going to be less foreign to me than somebody who doesn't. I think so. So I think there's a kind of say-do gap in the diversity and inclusion debate. What we say we want and what we actually are willing to do are two separate things. I think also, even when organizations are progressive enough to proactively recruit people who are different, there's a tendency, and this is a real challenge, a tendency for the newcomer to assimilate into the group. Therefore, they become less able to maintain and sustain their points of difference over time. But the reason why all of this is important, well, there are many reasons why it's important. So societally, it's important because we have got widening inequality across various denominators that we do need to address. And that comes back to the United Nations SDGs. We oughtn't to be marginalizing already discriminated groups and inhibiting their access to work. But the other thing, just to say, is as operating environments become more complex and challenging, we need diversity of thinking within our organizations to think laterally about, additional ways of solving problems or alternative perspectives. We need, for instance, people inside the organization who might think similarly to, our next ideal target customer group or what have you. You can't sell widgets to, I don't know, 65-year-olds if you don't have, representation from that cohort in your internal stakeholdership, because you can't, well, you might be able to, but with a limited amount of success, because you can't identify enough with that particular target group. So there's ethical reasons, and they are, if not the most important, they are the most important reason to recruit for inclusion. But then there are also kind of intellectual considerations that strike me as being somewhat of an own goal if you're not willing to include the broadest spectrum of talent into your suite of internal stakeholders.
Yeah, something actually that I just scribbled down here is that I've wondered if recruitment is very often conducted based on inside the organization, which misses out on the reality that if we're looking to change how the organization interacts more effectively with customers, clients, consumers, that we should be recruiting based on what's outside the organization.
Yeah, but to be honest, if I was to call it, I would say there's a complete lack of strategic thinking when it comes to recruitment. Recruitment has become just very, very tactical exercise. Buy the skills in from outside. That's just easier. and less problematic than investing in the development of homegrown talent,
Yeah.
as one, for instance.
And I think we've already started to touch on some of the drivers that are behind this trend. Is there anything you would add that's underpinning the
Yeah,
evolution of inclusive
yeah.
workplaces?
And actually, these are really, really important points for any employer that's listening to this podcast. First and foremost, we have an aging population in the global north. So what that means ostensibly is that people are coming to the end of their working careers and entering retirement faster than the youngest generation can replace them. Now, arguably, on the one hand, you might say, oh, well, that's okay because there's all these next generation technologies, these automation technologies, these artificial intelligences that will just replace the people. I don't think that's true, because there's going to be a massively long bedding in time where we come to terms with the ethical considerations and we actually create the kind of safe parameters for healthy AI adoption. What that ostensibly means, an aging population, we've got to keep the same number of people in work, because their tax receipts are going to support people of retirement age as they live for longer into their 80s, 90s, and 100s. They will all need advanced levels of care that somehow has to be paid for, and it is unrealistic to think that each and every individual is going to be able to pay for their own sophisticated level of healthcare. So we've got a shrinking labour market. That's the bottom line. We have got a shrinking labour market, which means that we need to get beyond ourselves and start thinking about how we are going to recruit more equitably, and how we're going to access the full labour market. And if we exclude people on the grounds of skin colour or gender or academic qualification or ability/disability, we are fighting a losing battle. I get really riled by the current political narrative that suggests that the people that have disappeared from the labour market, the people that are economically inactive, are malingering, lazy, entitled people. If you speak to any 50+ job seeker at the moment, you are most likely to hear a litany of complaints about just how exclusive recruitment practices have become. So it's a massive issue. It's a massive issue. And in my opinion, it boils down to outdated recruitment processes and not enough investment in the recruiters who are doing the sourcing and screening to think more comprehensively and holistically about how they're actually going about making those selection decisions.
And the other interesting thing for me is when you look at a kind of population shift. If we take the UK as an example, but it's not the only example, particularly around in the Northern Hemisphere. The role that immigration is going to play in the future in bringing new workers into the economy in absolutely essential roles is only going to grow. So employers into the future are likely to be calling for increasing immigration, because that's the only way that you actually generate enough people to do the jobs that we might need to be doing in the future. So there's an interesting shift, isn't there, that's coming along with this, with the idea from the UN SDGs around creating more inclusive workplaces. They're going to have to become more diverse into the future. Otherwise, economies stop working.
Yeah, but also, there is too little focus and attention paid to how organizations fit into the wider economic ecosystem. And for the last 25 years, we have benefited from lax immigration rules, and the side effect has been almost a full abandonment of investment into workplace upskilling and reskilling. It has just become easier to source the skills you need from the open market than it has been to invest in homegrown talent regeneration. I find it really problematic that we are still experiencing record numbers of immigration into this country when the public vote, as we were told for years and years, the public has voted. The public has voted. I didn't vote for Brexit, but the public voted for Brexit, and they have been completely lied to about the immigration, the real immigration data. And every time we are asked and invited to look at a dinghy crossing the channel, that is a complete side deflection from the reality of what is going on here. But the bottom line is we have to start looking nationwide at reskilling people whose skills have obsolesced, and upskilling people whose skills haven't yet obsolesced to make sure that they are still able to work to their best. So what have we done? I'm sorry to get on a soapbox, but what have we done in the last 30 to 40 years to provide alternative employment from marginalised communities in the northeast of England? So places where coal mining, for instance, has diminished, or fishing has diminished, or agricultural communities where farming has diminished. What have we done to invite regenerative skill up opportunities and employment opportunities to those areas? We talk a lot about levelling up. I'm not sure how much we actually do it in practice.
And through each of these episodes, we seem quite quickly to be able to get to a point where actually this is what's happening. This is where all the problems are. And I guess that's kind of natural because there are lots of problems here. But there are some potential benefits if we manage throughout organizations to create more inclusive working places, to create more diversity in our working places across all those dynamics that you laid out earlier on. So talk us through a vision of the future where you see a much more positive outcome and the impact that can have.
I'm really glad that you said positive outcome, because every time I think about the negative outcome, I've literally got that image in my brain of have you seen the film The Road?
Yes.
Which is like it's set in a post-apocalyptic world, and there's the guy and his son just walking along that. That's literally the image. So let's not talk about the worst case scenario, because I feel like every time our worst case scenario just sounds more of the same. A best case scenario is that progressive organizations who take their social and environmental responsibilities seriously really do start to figure out what they can do to build more inclusive, equitable workplaces. So for every vacancy that you have, can you say that you have got a range of candidates that so that there's adequate representation across all the different segments of diversity? Can you say that you have got a candidate who is a person of colour? Have you got a candidate who is who has accessibility issues? Have you got equal representation of male, female, and other? Have you ticked as many boxes as you can? And if you haven't, why is that? What is going on within your organization that is leading your recruiters to only serve up more of the same? That's probably an attitudinal level of inquiry, but nonetheless, it does need to be investigated, because modern job seekers are expecting employers to step up and act as a force for good on the social and environmental issues of the day. And if they see homogeny in your workforce, questions will get asked.
And that should be a good motivator, shouldn't it, to enterprise in particular, that there's an economic cost of not taking a positive view about creating inclusive workplaces with increasing diversity.
Yeah, I mean, look, whichever way you look at it, employers are under the microscope in a way that they have never been before, and you are being scrutinized long before anybody sends you their CV. You are being scrutinized in the same way that we've already decided what car we're going to buy long before we step onto the garage forecourt. We are making choices about who we would consider working for based on our internal set of values. And if there's a values misalignment, it's not going to cut the mustard. And I have to say, one of the key drivers behind needing to create more equitable, inclusive workplaces is the fact that we have got rising inequality. It's, we can't, I don't think we can continue societally with the top 1% holding all the wealth and everybody else can go to hell in a handbasket. That's non-viable.
Yeah. One of the other thing that strikes me is you were talking about the scrutiny that potential employers are under. Is that one of the benefits of social media, that some of that scrutiny actually comes from social media and allows greater access to where some of these things go wrong than perhaps we've been able to enjoy in the past?
That's a really good question. So I guess the internet has introduced us to the concept and the normalization of review websites. Everything's reviewed, isn't it? Trustpilot, TripAdvisor. God, I'm having a brain fart now, but we can think of many more. But in employment in particular, the most notorious employer review website is Glassdoor. So you've got that, which is, it's quite normal if you are perusing who you might go and work for to do a quick background check on Glassdoor just to hear what prior colleagues and have to say about that operating environment. But yes, social media does play quite a part, doesn't it? Because we've seen in the last 4 years, not relating to inclusivity particularly, but we've seen the reputational damage that has befallen Brewdog when a group of outgoing exiting employees banded together and wrote about the mismatch between what the MD said about the organizational culture and how the culture actually was. And I think they lost their B Corp status for that as well, which is not insignificant. Ditto, the open letter that went out from Apple employees, because I think Tim Cook said, oh, you can work from home forever. And then as soon as social sanctions were lifted, Apple then sent out a memo saying you can work in this way, this very uniform, top-down controlled way. And Apple employees took to social media to express their discontent. So yeah, I think, employee activism is on the rise, and there is an ever expanding array of social injustices that people can feel angered and enraged about. So I think if you want to protect your employer brand, it is incumbent on you to be live to all the potential issues that modern workers care about.
Very true. Let's then talk about some of the actions that organizations can take in encouraging more inclusive and diverse workplaces? What can organizations do right now to set themselves for success in the future, do you think?
I think the most obvious place to start is by undertaking a diversity audit. And then from there, convening a company-wide conversation on why diversity may not be a feature of your organization and what can be done about it. And then there's a big educational piece, isn't there, about improving the hiring process to ensure increased diversity, which entails every single hiring manager understanding the realities of the modern labour market and every single recruiter feeling empowered to source a diverse spectrum of options of potential candidates to fill a role. So there's step one is wake up.
Yes.
Wake up and check your landscape. And step two is educate yourself and understand, the benefits outweigh the homogeny. The benefits are if you can embrace inclusion in the way that I'm recommending, you immediately tick a kind of CSR box, but more importantly, you gain access to a far broader church of knowledge and attitude and insight that can help you future-proof your business strategy.
And I know I've said this a number of times that in a number of the episodes of the podcast we've been doing together, but it's about humanizing it, isn't it? And not losing sight of the fact that actually organizations are successful because of people, and the broader the broader our diversity, the more likely we are to be successful. And there's plenty of evidence that supports that, isn't there?
Yeah, 100%. And that's not a bad place to start, is it? Humanizing work, humanizing workplaces. All you people in the C-suite with your 7-figure salaries, you didn't get there by virtue of your own unique skills and competencies. You got there through interactions with other people. No man is an island, no woman is an island.
That's a really nice way to end it, I think, when we're talking about inclusive workplaces. No man or woman is an island. Kat, thank you so much. That's been totally fascinating once again.
Thanks, Steve.
In the podcast description, you'll find a link to Working the Future website and how you can contact Kat to find out more about Working the Future. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a future episode, and do tell your friends and colleagues about the Informing Choices mini pod. We'll see you on another episode very soon.